If you're looking for a new unusual pet that is easy to take care of, cheap to take care of, has very little space requirements, yet is full of personality, look no further than the jumping spider. Today we're going to talk about how to care for a jumping spider, from setting up their enclosure, to handling, to feeding and watering, and everything in between. So if you decide to add one to your family, you'll know exactly how to take care of one. Jumping spiders are probably one of the most underrated invertebrates you can have as a pet. They are insanely curious and they'll follow you around their enclosure. They'll use every inch of their enclosure with how explorative they are, and even though they have 8 eyes, their 2 largest ones are forward facing and they just make their entire expressions irresistibly cute. The jumping spider joining us today is either a Phidippus audax, or bold jumping spider, or a Phidippus regius, or regal jumping spider. We don't know exactly what species he is, so if there's any experienced keepers on here who can identify him for us, that would be wonderful. We're still kind of new to this hobby. If you have one as a pet though, you won't want to use its common name when referring to it. In general, in the jumping spider community, you're going to want to refer to it by its scientific name because there are multiple common names for each species, which just can add some confusion. So by using the scientific name, people will know exactly what species you're talking about. But he actually chose us in a way. We found him crawling around our fish tank. He was literally on the hood of our fish tank when we found him. Oh, he just went into his little nest. Oh, that's adorable. You're so cute. His name is Chalupa, by the way. We decided not to keep him though ourselves, and instead we gave him to some good friends of ours who had been wanting a jumping spider, but then we immediately regretted that decision because we fell in love with him, and I'm so lucky I get to borrow you for today's video. So what we did instead was we bought a couple of captive bred baby jumping spiders. Oh my gosh, they're so cute and tiny. I can't wait till you're as big as Chalupa. There are many different species of jumping spiders you can keep as pets, although most people just keep the species that they can find in their own backyard. For the most part, people just find their jumping spider outside and they bring it in and keep it as a pet. I know it sounds kind of weird because in the reptile community, it's pretty frowned upon to keep a wild-caught animal, but it's a whole different story when it comes to jumping spiders. To find one, you're going to want to look on the warm walls of your house. That's generally a good spot for them to hang out because they like to bask in the sun on warm afternoons. You can also look on sliding glass windows or just around your house in places where they can kind of tuck behind a ledge or something yet still come out into the sun if they want to warm up. But with the increasing popularity of jumping spiders, even in just the last 2-3 years, there are a lot more becoming available as captive bred specimens. There's a lot more people breeding them nowadays. If you'd rather go the captive bred route, then we recommend just joining a jumping spider group on Facebook or looking online. There are more breeders nowadays than ever before. Okay, let's talk about enclosures. First off, jumping spiders are arboreal, meaning they love to climb around and they prefer more of a vertical environment than a horizontal one. They can adapt, so if all you have is a horizontally oriented enclosure, they'll probably be fine, but they prefer something more vertically oriented. A lot of keepers will just use a container like this. They're kind of like the Beanie Baby containers, you know, that would showcase Beanie Babies. Gosh, I'm old. And these will work just fine. You basically want to avoid a mesh enclosure because the environment will dry out a lot faster with mesh, and one of the biggest threats to a jumping spider is dehydration. So you want something that's more enclosed with just a couple of ventilation holes instead. There really is no minimum size requirement for a jumping spider, but since they're so active, they'll use a lot of space. So if you give them a decent amount of room, they will totally utilize it. Another option for an enclosure would be this guy. This is one of Zilla's newer products. They're not a sponsor, we just think this is a really cool enclosure. It's their small invertebrate enclosure that's like super easy to put together. It just puzzles together really well and it transports flat, or it collapses really well, so we really like this enclosure and I wanted to show you guys in case you wanted to use it too. If it's not out yet, it will be soon, so in that case you're just getting a sneak peek to a new Zilla product. Something to keep in mind with the enclosure for your jumping spider is how it opens. These guys make their nests at the top of their enclosure, so if the lid comes off, you're going to tear open their nest every time you open it up. So instead, you want an enclosure that either opens about a third of the way down, so that you can remove the lid without damaging their nest, or you'll just want a front opening enclosure. Substrate should just be a soil that is slightly moist. Again, dehydration is a threat to these little guys, especially when they're young, so make sure that it stays slightly damp, yet not sopping wet. You'll probably want to lightly mist the substrate occasionally just to make sure it doesn't dry out. In my opinion, the most fun part is decorating the enclosure, and it's really simple. I mean, you only have 4 by 8 inches to work with a jumping spider. You can get your decor from literally going outside and grabbing sticks and branches and leaves and bringing them inside. However, you do want to disinfect them, of course, because mites are a threat to jumping spiders. So to clean and disinfect decor that comes from the outdoors, I recommend either dipping it in boiling water for a couple minutes, or you can bake it in the oven at about 250 degrees for like 20 minutes, and that should kill anything that's on the surface. Some people aren't worried about bugs being on the decor they collect from the outdoors, but again, mites are a threat to jumping spiders as well as pesticides. If what you collect had been treated or sprayed with pesticides, those are gonna instantly kill your jumping spider. If you don't want to get decor from outside, or you don't know what to grab exactly, you can instead buy decor like leaves or flowers, fake plants from the Dollar Tree. Super cheap way to do it. Your jumping spider, though, will need some solid, sturdy objects to crawl around on, though, not just leaves. If you grab branches from the outdoors, those could work. If you don't want to grab your decor from outside, then you can just use cork bark. I personally prefer just the look of cork bark, so that's why I use it in my enclosures, as opposed to grabbing sticks from the outdoors. And cork bark provides a nice, lightweight, yet sturdy surface for them to crawl around on. Decorating the enclosure is totally up to you, and you can deck it out however you want, really. The jumping spider isn't going to care how pretty it is, but it's fun to decorate it. If you want to decorate it with flowers and leaves and attach them to the branches or the cork bark, I would recommend not using a hot glue gun to attach them, because with spritzing or with contact with water over time, this will lose its adhesive abilities. So instead, a better solution that's more permanent is just stapling the fake flowers or leaves to the cork bark itself. And that's it! That's your enclosure. Super easy. You don't need any additional heating or lighting for a jumping spider. They just like room temperature. So now let's talk about how to feed and water your jumping spider. It's typically not recommended to use a water dish because, like other spiders, they can drown in it. Jumping spiders get most of the moisture they need from their prey items, which we'll talk about next, but you can lightly mist their enclosure and they'll drink the water droplets off of the walls or off of their decor. However, if you miss them, just give them 1 spritz. That's all they need. That's more than enough water for them. Some keepers will, however, use a water dish. So if you decide to go that route, then just make sure you put a cotton ball or a sponge of sorts in the water dish so that there isn't any open water available that they could drown in. Instead, then they can just drink water off of the sponge. It'll also prevent the feeder insects from drowning too. And use dechlorinated water, of course. I like to use the API water conditioner because it's very concentrated, and 2 drops will treat an entire gallon of water, so 1 bottle will last you a lifetime. By the way, I'll put links to all products mentioned in this video in the description below in case you need to pick anything up. Now let's talk about diet and feeding. Feeding a jumping spider is probably the most exciting part about owning one of them because they are great hunters, they have excellent vision. I mean, if you're walking by their enclosure, their eyes will follow you walking by. They're very movement-based. So it doesn't take long for them to notice if you've dropped a cricket or another prey item in their enclosure, and they'll pretty quickly hunt it down. You can feed them pretty much any appropriately sized insect, as long as it isn't a beetle of sorts, because that hard shell is hard for them to get through. And they, for some reason, don't really like moths a whole lot, from what I hear. But crickets and fruit flies and dubia roaches all work great as feeders. If you use dubia roaches, though, those like to dig under the soil, and it's hard for the jumpers to find them. So I would recommend feeding them in a different container if you want to do dubia roaches. So it might just be easier to stick with crickets and fruit flies and things that move around a bit more on the surface. When it comes to size, you can feed a jumping spider an insect that is just about as big as the spider itself. They are pretty bold when it comes to hunting and eating. Some of them, though, seem more intimidated by large prey items and prefer smaller ones, so I don't want to anthropomorphize a jumping spider too much, but if yours seems to be afraid of prey items that are roughly the same size as it, try something a little bit smaller and it might feel more confident taking that down instead. If it's tough to get live feeders, jumping spiders are opportunistic feeders. They will eat pre-killed prey items. So if you have, like, your only cricket left is dead, but it's a good size, throw it in there, see if he eats it. He probably will. Unlike reptiles that often need their prey to be dusted with a multivitamin or a calcium powder, you don't need any of that for jumping spiders. You'll want to feed them every 2 to 3 days or so, maybe 2 to 4 days depending on the age and size of the jumping spider. You can typically tell when they're ready for their next meal just by observing the size of their abdomen. After a meal, the abdomen will be quite large, but after they've had a couple days to digest it, it will shrink. So over time, you'll learn what is a full abdomen and an empty abdomen just by observing your jumping spider. Next, let's talk about cohabiting jumping spiders. Don't do it. They can be cannibalistic, so 1 per enclosure. Cleaning is pretty easy with these guys. Unlike some tarantulas or other spiders that will create huge webs all around their enclosure, jumpers limit their nest to just one little spot, usually near the top of their enclosure, but that is their home, and they don't rebuild their nests. They keep building onto the same nest, so that's why it's so important not to tear it, like if you had a lid that lifted off the top. That home is very important to them. Unlike tarantulas, which when they molt, they'll usually remove their exoskeleton from their nest and they kind of clean it up. Jumping spiders take their exoskeleton and they add it to the nest. It just adds more building material for their house, apparently. So you'll notice over time, their nest will just keep growing. If you need to move them though, like say you're moving this guy, Chalupa, you want to check out the habitat I just built for you? First off, to entice a jumping spider to move forward, instead of like poking with your finger, you can simply use a macaw feather. Or, if you don't have a macaw, I suppose you could use a paintbrush. So we're going to nudge him forward. Check it out, dude! Check out your new home! Oh, there you go, dude. Yeah, check it out! If you have to move them to a new enclosure like this, they will rebuild their nest. It's not the end of the world. They're pretty adaptable and hardy. Since their nest is located at the top, it makes cleaning really easy, by the way. Cleaning is just a matter of removing any decor from their enclosure and de-webbing it. Again, they don't make a web in their entire enclosure, but they often will trail behind a small thread of silk as they move around, so that may accumulate a little bit and you'll want to remove it from time to time. But as far as waste goes, I mean, you'll have like the remains of their prey items after they're done eating them, but their poop isn't noticeable, so cleaning is a breeze with jumping spiders. Now let's talk about handling your jumping spider. Again, to get them to move, you can just kind of touch their abdomen from the back with a paintbrush. Come here. There we go. He jumped right onto my hand. And they are very curious little fellows, like I've said before. They're pretty docile. They can bite. They do have impressive looking fangs, but the strength behind those fangs is typically not strong enough to break the skin on your fingers. It could possibly break the skin on the like thinner areas of skin on your body, but when are you gonna hold a jumping spider by your ankle? I mean, your hands are gonna be just fine. How did you move all the way over there? And even though they can bite, their venom is not medically significant to humans. So really, you want to be more concerned over their safety when handling than your own. By this, I mean use clean hands. Use clean hands to hold these guys. Any chemicals can negatively impact them. And any baby jumping spiders, you really don't want to hold at all. You want to wait until they're, you are so cute. You want to wait until they're, a decent size before you start holding them. I don't know if there's a certain measurement out there that's a minimum handling size, but just be smart about it. Be gentle with them and don't push it. As their name implies, they do like to jump, but they will often follow themselves with a thin strand of silk. But if they don't create that silk behind them, they can fall and hurt themselves. So just treat them like the little fragile beings that they are and you'll be all right. You are so cute. And lastly, I would like to just briefly touch on sexing jumping spiders. It's not too difficult once they reach a decent size. As little babies, you can't really sex them as far as I'm aware, but once they get to be a decent size like Chalupa here, males have pretty bulbous pedipalps. They kind of make them look like they're wearing boxing gloves. And males also have very long front legs. In addition, all males have some sort of like mating dance or ritual to show off to the ladies, but that can vary from species to species. Come on, you can do it. Jump, jump. I have him trained. You can do it, you can do it. Oh, yeah. Worked all day on that. But yeah, I really like this new enclosure by Zilla. I think it's a really cool, like, innovative design, so I would recommend one of these for a jumping spider. It's just perfect. Plus, they're coming out with a larger version for tarantulas in both a vertical and a horizontal form. Oh my gosh, their faces are just so cute. Guys, if you haven't yet, Google close-up jumping spider face. They have the cutest faces, all of them do, oh my gosh. So that pretty much covers how to take care of a pet jumping spider. They're amazing animals, guys. Again, super underrated. They're so fascinating, and you wouldn't think it, but they're actually pretty full of personality for a little spider. I hope you all learned something new and enjoyed today's video. As always, thank you to our Patreon backers for supporting our channel. We love all you guys, and your support is just so nice. And thank you to everybody who is just supporting by watching our videos. If you have additional tips or tricks to share, feel free to include them in the comments below, and we will see you next time. If they're feeling threatened, they will, well, that was a good jump. Come here. Come on, jump. Chalupa, jump. Oh, yeah, good chalupa. Oh, you're so cute. Patreon backers for supporting this channel. Oh, you're on my ring. That was so cute.